Welcome to Open Dialogue. I'm Noel T. Manning II, and we're really happy to continue talking about Avatar, The Way of Water. Today on Open Dialogue, for this particular edition, we're going to be speaking with composer Simon Franglen. He spent over a year composing nearly 3 hours of original score for this film, and if you've seen the film, that's a lot of music, and there's very little that doesn't have score. He's going to be talking about that with us today, and also just a few things we're not going to be able to chat about, but he composed and recorded this score over 3 different continents using over 100 musicians performing this amazing work. And also there was an original song written for this as well, and he's going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to get him to share about how that happened and maybe some interesting aspects of what we see on film. Simon is known for a body of work that's pretty amazing, going back to working with people like Howard Shore on Seven and Cronenberg on Crash, and even working on films like The Bodyguard and Moulin Rouge. He was known as a musician and a producer and working with amazing talents, and we're going to talk to him a little bit about that as well. So please stick around and enjoy your time with us as we talk to Simon Franglen about Avatar, The Way of Water. Hello and welcome to Meet Me at the Movies Open Dialogue. Noel T. Manning II here. Really happy to have Simon Franglen joining us to talk about his life, his music, and this monumental project, Avatar, The Way of Water. I really appreciate you coming to talk to us about your score and really about where this love came from. So thank you for being here with us.
Well, you're very, very welcome, Noel. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. Well, I know that you've had a deep love of music for quite a long time. Do you want to give us just kind of that genesis of where that started and maybe how you were able to find that merging with music and movies?
So obviously, I mean, that music was important in my family, but I wrote to the BBC when I was 13 and said, how do I become a record producer? So I haven't had any, I have no choice about my life. I would be I'd be a terrible employee. I'd be terrible at almost anything else. And I worked in studios in Britain, almost immediately after I left college. I went to, it was what I was going to do. And at some point I got persuaded, but somebody saw me working with music and computers, early music computers, which was my specialty. I have a thing, which is I don't think when I use music computers at all. It's just natural. And somebody saw me working on them in London, England, and said, you need to come to Los Angeles because there's nobody who works the way that you do. And so I was persuaded to move to Los Angeles, and I came to LA, and it was like eye-opening, the quality of what I was seeing here. And I stopped being a record producer and went back to being a musician. There was so much to learn. And I had a good career in Los Angeles, it's fair to say. So I became sort of, a pretty high-end keyboard player and programmer for people. So I would do albums with Quincy Jones and Michael Jackson and Celine and Whitney and Toni Braxton and Madonna and Uncle Tom Cobley and all. And at some point I started crossing over, because this is Hollywood. There would be songs for films. And I think the first thing I did was a thing with John Barry on Dancing with Wolves. And then that came to me working with John Barry on Chaplin. And then that sort of evolved into me working with Alan Silvestri. And I started working with him a lot. And then Howard Shore. And then eventually James Horner heard about me and asked me to work with him on Titanic. And so that was where it sort of blended. And somewhere in the middle of Titanic, James gave me a piano sketch and said, do you think this would work for Celine? And I'd done dozens of records with Celine. So that became My Heart Will Go On. And the rest is sort of like, that did rather well. then there
Yes,
came a
it did.
point where I went back to England for family reasons, and sort of stopped doing stuff in Hollywood for a while until I was actually back out here producing Tony Braxton. And James phoned me again and said, look, please come, we know you don't do this anymore, but please come and have a look at a movie we're working on. And so they showed me 5 minutes of Avatar. And I immediately thought, no, I really need to do this. So that's really the potted history in 45 seconds.
I tell you, you mentioned Chaplin, and before we move on, I just have to tell you, Chaplin was amazing to me, and the score absolutely just phenomenal. And I want more people to go back and revisit that film and also revisit that score. So just want to share that with you before we move on.
No, I couldn't agree more. I remember being at Abbey Road Studios where Robert Downey came into the studio whilst we were working, and this was Robert Downey Jr. He was in the fresh part of his career, and it is the most incredible performance by him. I think it's still, as far as I'm concerned, his greatest performance. It's astonishing, but but I think the score again that John wrote, it has that heart-wrenching quality, and so on. Anyway, yes, just to digress.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned Horner, you mentioned Avatar, and that is something we want to spend some time talking about today. You and Horner not only worked together, but you were friends, colleagues, and you took the mantle, so to speak, as you're taking on Avatar, The Way of Water. I'd love for you to talk about that process of being true to James, but also being true to your creativity and bringing this new film to life with your music. And so much music is a part of this film. It's pretty amazing.
It is fair to say. I mean, there's 3 hours of score in plus a few minutes of song. I think Jim Cameron did give me 5 minutes off. So I'll take that as a win. No, in this case, so. Obviously, I'd done Avatar 1. Obviously, we were working. I was sort of like working on the park music for Pandora World of Avatar, this enormous, incredible park that Disney had put together. And I'd been the point person for this. And James had written a theme for one of the rides and so on. And obviously we were incorporating themes from Avatar 1 into that whole area. And after he died in 2015, and the Walt Disney Imagineering and Lightstorm, Jim and John, said, look, you need to please take over just delivering the rest of the music for the park, which I did. And that was like 5 hours of music that needed for the park. And that was about the middle of 2017 when that finishes. In December 2017, Jim calls me up and says, you need to come and talk to me about the music for the films upcoming. You need to read the scripts. And the scripts, so he gave me two. I went into a room and I read Avatar 2, Avatar 3, Avatar 4, Avatar 5. And one of the things that Jim needed me to do is to understand the journey of the characters and so on, in order for some of the things that we were doing. The journey informs everybody, and that's true of the actors and so on. But he looks at music as being an essential part of his film, and he felt that it was important that I understood the journey, because on the first page of Avatar 2, in the first paragraph, it says, Neytiri sings the song chord. And the song chord became the very first thing I had to write, because part of the reason he wanted to get me in then was that there was on-screen music. And that on-screen music needed to have shape, and it needed to have relevance. And so my first task was to sit down and write a theme that he wanted to have an ancient quality, but also have that sense of a mother's love. There was the idea of the song chord was a concept where you could sing your family history, so that each member of the family has their own song chord. So you could grab a song chord and sing your grandparents' life, and so on. Or you could sing your, 10 generations ago, you would take a song chord and then sing their lives from that song chord. But also, as you have your children, you make them a new song chord. So that this was the idea of this. And so there was an essential thing here, which is how do I then embody that into the lyric? Because Jim wanted me to create, obviously she needs to sing words as well as just la something. So I decided with Jim that it needed to be sung in Na'vi, the language of Pandora. That's to ground it, to give it that sense of the place. And I came up with a concept based on indigenous cultures around the world, which is that a life is a spark that starts, and then that light from the spark becomes the dawn, and then you carry the dawn through the day, and then the day goes to the sunset, and that is a life. And that was sort of a lyrical core for me. And then I had to write these lyrics based on Neteyem, on Kiri, on Loa, Tuk. I wrote different lyrics for different characters. Now, we didn't use all of them in the film, but we needed to have them there. And that, once I had got that right, and Jim had approved it, and we then recorded it with Zoe Saldana in April of 2018. And she sings the vocal you see live on set on screen is a live vocal. It's what she sang on set. I didn't go into a recording studio and pre-record it with her. That's live with 100 technicians and a boom mic. Yes, it's very special. So I think that gave me a way in, because that then became my core theme for the film. And I do an orchestral version of that as well, that Leaving Home Tree. As they fly away, you can hear exactly the same theme effectively on the big orchestral thing. And that is something that was very much a core, and you hear elements of that even in the swim. There's a cue called From Darkness to Light, which again has elements of song chord in there, because Jim and I saw that as being the family, and the family was the core part of the music that needed to be made.
You mentioned the cue, or was there a certain sound cue, a single cue that you felt that you were the most proud of in this particular film?
I think probably for different. I'll give you a couple that for different reasons. One, okay. I think From Darkness to Light for me is a cue that I had to redo a number of times until we got to a point where both Jim and I were in tears when we watched it. He said to me, if we don't have everybody in the cinema crying by the time we finish this, then we haven't done our job. And I think at the point that there was we went through a number of rewrites, because Jim is a perfectionist. Jim wants it to be absolutely right. And that perfection it's not just, the music is every part, it's everything he wants, and it's everything he expects of himself, is that there is that perfection to what happens. And you do your best to try and make that happen musically. But I'm very, very proud of that cue. I think it has a heart to it that I think is important. And I'm, on a purely musical basis, I do like the key change as we move from the first half to the second half. I always was quite proud of that. The other cue, on a completely exact opposite, 180 degrees opposite, is Bad Parents, which is just a headbanger. And I just decided it needed to really just hammer. It's one of the action cues. And so I'm very, very pleased with that one.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And bad parents, yeah, that speaks to, I think, all of us at some point. As if we're parents, as much as we want to be perfect, there are times maybe we're not so perfect.
Oh yeah, no, they're definitely not being so perfect in that scene. It's fair to say that the actual scene title for the film was "The Parents from Hell," and. It had become Bad Parents on my cue name, so that's what stuck for me.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Going back to what you had mentioned earlier about working on the music for the Avatar theme parks for Disney parks, how is your approach different for doing that than doing the actual film? Even though it's both part of the same family, but they're different because of the experiences being different.
Yeah, and there's a couple of variations here. One is the music that you actually have in the attractions, in the rides. Those are very much those are hyper scripted, and we refine them again and again and again because with Imagineering, once you get the music set, it's pretty well locked in for 20 years. You can't go back and fix it because the complexity of this ride, the complexity of the immersive sound systems that we're using, which dwarf what we can do in the cinema. We're using a thing called Iosono, which really is the granddaddy of all immersive audio systems. And we've got hundreds and hundreds of speakers that we're dealing with. So, and we're placing sounds in space as you go through, whether you're in the canoe ride or in Flight of Passage. There are things going on that really need incredible detail, and so that, in terms of the amount of time you spend on a few minutes of music, that's probably about as high intensity in terms of trying to get everything right as you'll ever get. And then the park itself has 5 hours that runs, because when you go to the restaurant, you want to stay immersed. One of the things I'm proudest of is that there is a bar and there's a restaurant, and they are in the same courtyard. And Disney said to me, we don't want to have that situation of two beach bars with different music competing with each other. So I actually wrote the entire hour. There's an hour of music, and the 2 hours, one playing in the bar, which is often the strangest of things. They said that we want a mutant electro. We want a mutant electro lounge stuff at times, and then because they said they gave me a concept of a guy who'd been stranded on Pandora and had got his own bar. He was a sort of beach bum who was playing this sort of mutant music, and then there is more traditional like score type stuff playing in the restaurant. Now, the point is that you don't want that conflict. So what we ended up doing was there's about probably 8 or 10 different pieces of music across that hour, is that you can walk between them and they merge seamlessly, literally frame accurately as you go back and forth. And you will often hear them go from being a major poppy track reflects into the relative minor orchestral version of that sounds completely different, but they actually blend entirely perfectly, and you can play them side by side out of 2 different speakers and get completely different experiences as you walk back and forth between them. So that one is one of my proudest technical moments purely on the park. But what it did do was we were doing things there for the park that needed to be specific to the park, and I think that what we wanted for Way of Water was a similar thing, where we're moving to new vistas, we've got new things, and therefore we wanted the sound and the sonic signature had to evolve with where we're going. There is although we brought things from Avatar 1, we brought themes. Probably 9/10 of the score is new because it's required, and that's what Jim wanted. Ultimately, remember that I'm just a conduit to write music for Jim Cameron's film.
Right.
And so that sense of getting to the new vistas of the Metcaina and of the ocean and meeting the new characters and the new themes. And also, funnily enough, even right at the beginning of the film, Jim said to me, we don't actually have an RDA theme. We don't actually have our Imperial March. I wrote a sort of, there's this sort of, should we say, there's a pair of Russian dolls here, which are the RDA theme, and then there is a Quaritch theme that actually fits inside that as well. And you don't actually hear them fully connected, but they are. There is Quaritch, and there is RDA, and so there is dum ba da da bum bum ba da ba da ba da ba da, all this stuff, which is the RDA. And inside this is this ba da 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 ba da ba da 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 thing for Quaritch. And so that, there were things that Jim had said to me. He wanted a more, I suppose you'd say, more leitmotific score in some ways compared to A1, whereas A1 had 10 great themes, but they tended to be used once. He wanted a little bit more repetition in this one, and I think that was an active choice in terms of how we approached it. The other thing I would say is that he made a very conscious decision early on to tell me that I needed to go more muscular with the action music, and that was something that Jim wanted. He thought this particular film required it. It required it a slightly more, there's a bit more muscle, I think, in terms of some of this stuff.
I would love to spend hours and hours talking to you about your life, about your work on this film, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but I do want to ask you a final question before we wrap. I know that you were a part of this project, and you've been a part of the Pandora and Avatar world for so long now. What was it like for you once you finally saw that final cut and got to see and hear and experience all of these efforts on the big screen for that first time?
The interesting thing is, I'd seen some of the reels in 3D down in New Zealand when we were working, but only the first, reel 1 and reel 14 were the only two I'd actually seen properly in 3D. And some of the test stuff we'd sent out that you could see, there were some snippets they'd put out. So I'd seen that, but to actually see the flow, because we obviously work in these reels, so we separate everything out. And often, although we do reviews of the whole film, they're few and far between. Mostly we're working, let's review reel 1, let's review reel 8. And so to see the flow, and actually also, at this point, there's nothing I can do. So it's out there, right? I have to, you discover that you've got to set your children free. And
right.
And so I think there was a relief that we were there, because we did finish so late. We finished I gave over the last cue on November the 23rd. I caught COVID on November the 24th, and we mixed it, and I had to I was basically locked in my hotel room for 8 days while they quarantined me. The film was actually print mastered and finaled. The final was on December the 1st. The premiere in London, and it was December the 6th. Now you can see the timeline is somewhat freaky, should we say, in comparison to any other movie in the world. And therefore, I think there was a sense of relief that, thank the Lord, that we were there. And also, I remember when we got to the card, when we got to the end title card and the Avatar Way of Water appeared, I could feel this cinema there was a wave of, like, a visceral sense of applause. And it was quite unlike I've been to, when you go to premieres, often you get this, oh yeah, this is great and everything else. This wasn't like that. This was almost like this flood of emotion, because I think if you see the film, that last 20 minutes, we really go for you emotionally. I think there is an emotional journey in that last section of the film, so that when that card hits, it's like a relief. And I mean this sort of like, there's a sense of, I don't want to say joy because it's not the right sense, but there is a sense of this point where, and we've been so wrapped up in the either the beauty or the tragedy or the drama or the action. Jim has crafted an incredible film. And I think that for me, there was that point when that happened in London and in Los Angeles, where you could feel it was like it was that we were there. That's my score. Now, to give you an idea,
Wow.
probably the normal score would be 2/3 of one of these.
Wow.
So there's
wow.
That's the amount of music that I wrote for this film, and I think, it's a pretty monumental task for us to get that amount of music delivered. I'm very proud of it, and I think I'm very proud of the film, and the response has been astonishing. I mean, I'm very, very, very touched by the number of people who are just saying how nice things about the music and obviously about the film.
Simon Franglen, thank you so much. Your work truly is a marvel, and your 3+ hours of music on this film brought it to another level as well. Not that James Cameron needs things brought to another level, because he takes it there anyway. But thank you so much. You phenomenal.
Great. Well, thank you very much indeed, Noel. It has been a great pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks for joining us on Open Dialogue. I'm Noel T. Manning II, and that's a wrap.